parents win, community wins, the environment wins, and then we as the franchisor win when our franchisees are also successful. Kid to Kid is the second most recognized children's brand in the whole country.
Imagine a Utah where every strip mall looks exactly the same, where your only coffee or hot chocolate option is Starbucks, and every shopping trip takes you to the same big box stores. For 17 straight years, Utah has ranked #1 in the nation for economic outlook. But as we expand, corporate giants see opportunity, which threatens the small businesses that make our state special. That's why I created this podcast. This isn't just a podcast, it's a blueprint and a call to action for my fellow Utahns. Let's keep Utah local. This is UtahPreneur. Shauna Sloan and her husband Brent founded Kid to Kid in 1992 with no outside funding and with a plan to franchise from the very beginning. And what you're about to find out is that mindset of franchising from the very beginning completely transformed the way they set up their first businesses, and now they have over 100 Kid to Kid locations all over the US, Canada, Portugal, and Spain. And some quick notes for context: Shauna doesn't own Kid to Kid anymore. They sold a majority stake a few years ago, but she still runs a few stores and helps consult behind the scenes and goes to the office most days. You'll also hear us refer to her kids, Chelsea and Scott. They founded Kid to Kid's sister brand, Uptown Cheapskate, which has even more stores and is an incredible success story of its own that we'll probably cover on a future podcast. It was a dream come true to have Shauna on. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I did.
It took us 5 months before we broke the $10,000 a month mark back in 1992. And today we have stores that do 10 times that much in their grand opening weekend.
Wow.
So, so it was difficult, and it was, we qualified for WIC and all of those things because we had these 4 kids and no money and no income. And, so I really can relate to a lot of our shoppers in the stores that are trying to manage their family on a very, very low budget, because I did that. I lived that.
Yeah.
And I remember we were 3 or 4 months into it, and I made our budget out, and I told Brent, I says, we can last until the end of January, and then we're going to starve. And about the 15th of January, somebody rear-ended me at a stoplight and dented the back of my minivan pretty badly.
Oh boy.
And nobody was hurt, but we took the insurance money, and we lived on that until we got to the point where we were able to live off the business. So it took us a while.
That was grocery money, not
That was
fix the car money.
We didn't fix the car. We bought food for our kids.
Wow.
So.
And that was what, like 2 months after you started the first store?
That was probably it was January. So 3 months in.
Were those figures like, okay, yeah, this is manageable as long as we make this much?
It was manageable to the extent that we did a lot of the work ourselves. So, we had the rent that we had to cover, obviously, and we had to be able to pay people for the product that they were bringing in. But I worked a lot of the labor hours in the store. Brent helped build the fixtures. We put up the slot wall ourselves. We build it out physically. He's down there painting.
Wow.
So we did a lot of the work ourselves.
Yeah.
And I remember, back in the day, you had window displays, and Brent's pretty artistic, and I remember the Easter display. He made these eggs, cut them out of foam core, and we spray painted them in the garage, and make this cute window display that said "Exceptional," and that kind of thing. So we did a lot of it ourselves to keep the costs low.
Love it.
While we were building it up.
Did starting that second store a year later financially, was that easier or harder than the first one?
About the same, because we were just pumping everything back in.
Yeah.
Back into the business so we could grow it.
And then talk to me about your third store being a franchise. To me, a franchise is something that, they've got a good 20, 30 locations, very proven concept. The founder's been around for a while. Was it a harder sell because of how new you were?
Yes, I think so. So we met the franchisees at the grand opening of one of our stores.
Okay.
They were shopping for their kids. So,
yeah,
most of our franchisees are parents. In fact, 90% of them are women.
Wow.
And often they do it as a couple, but the husband kind of keeps his job, and the woman's the one that runs the store. Is how most of our franchisees get started in this, but, so we met them at the grand opening and we said, "Yeah, we're gonna franchise it," and they're like, "We live down in Provo and there's so many kids and we think this would be a great spot," and we're like, "Yes, and we're developing the franchise, prospectus and we'll have that ready for you," and so we just kept in contact with them and until they were ready to open.
Very
So I
cool.
think they did it based on faith in me and my husband,
Got it.
you know?
Yeah, and that's fair. Like when you get to actually meet the founder and they're not gonna just, ghost you on the phone. They're gonna stay in contact with you. They know where to find you. It's probably a little easier sell.
Yeah, we work very closely with them. In fact, I remember when they came to training, I was in the Sandy store with them and showing them things. Maybe it was even before they came to training when they were still trying to decide whether to buy a franchise, but we were in the Sandy store and this couple walks in the store and Scott, the big burly fireman husband, looks at the couple and he's like, "I know them." And he kind of gets like a little ashen face, like, I'm embarrassed because here I am in this secondhand store. And the couple comes up and says, "Well, hey, what are you doing here, Scott?" And he says, "Well, we're thinking about doing a franchise of this company." And they're like, "Oh, that'd be awesome. We love this store." And then he gets this big smile on his face and gets the confidence back,
Yeah.
that, yes, we're doing the right thing.
Love that story.
So,
So tell me about where you grew up, how you ended up in Utah. How did that happen?
well, I was born and raised in Salt Lake City. I'm an Avenues girl. I'm an East High leopard, and I graduated in the University of Utah. So I'm born and bred here.
Love it. And did you have any entrepreneurial mentors or influences growing up?
I actually did. I was probably one of the few second graders in the 1960s who, when they asked you what your dad did for a living, I had to answer, "He's an entrepreneur." And then I had to explain what being an entrepreneur was. So it's definitely in my bloodlines. My dad was Wally Wright, and he converted the old bus barns into Trolley Square. So
Wow.
he built that. Was the one that rebuilt Salt Air out of the Great Salt Lake. He built the original Alpine Slide up in Park City, and all sorts of other fun things. So he was definitely entrepreneur and helped us as kids get that entrepreneurial spirit. When I was in seventh grade, I had a brother a year older and a brother a year younger. He set up a popcorn stand down in Trolley Square for us to run as our first business.
Wow.
And so we hired our friends and we sold popcorn in Trolley Square from this popcorn stand.
Love it. So then Kid to Kid starts in 1992, right?
Correct.
Is there any other background we should know from your popcorn stand to when Kid to Kid started that influenced that happening?
Well, I did a lot of different small businesses but really the thing that inspired me, to get started with, the kid to kid concept is that I was a mom at the time with 4 children, and I just loved shopping, um, thrift and resale and garage sales and any way that I could to find a deal. I was a treasure hunter to the core. And my husband and I had always wanted to be, in business for ourselves, but the problem is he had a really good job,
Hmm.
and so it was getting to the point where we were never gonna be able to be in business for ourselves because he was making too much money working for someone else.
The golden handcuffs.
Yeah, exactly, and, so as the story goes, he had worked for about 6 months to negotiate the perfect deal for this shopping center, back in Boston, and finally got the deal he wanted, accepted the job. We brought our kids out to Utah to stay with the grandparents while we went house hunting in Boston, and we got here, and something just came over us that said, "You should go to Utah."
Hmm.
Instead of Boston, and we had kind of been looking into maybe starting our own company, and we talked about it, and we decided that we were still young enough that if it didn't work, he could go back into the industry that he came from, so it was like, we were willing to take the risk because we felt like we were young and he could always start back at what he was doing.
So you were in the East Coast and you were gonna move to Boston, or you were already in Boston?
We were actually in Ohio, and we were gonna move to Boston
For another job.
for another job.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you come back home, just kind of chatting, and you feel like, okay,
Now is the time. If we're gonna start a
yeah.
business, we should do it now. And during that negotiation process, while he was talking with a company in Boston, I had talked to him about maybe doing a resale store. There was a company in Ohio where that I was shopping, and I'd watched it grow from 1 store to 27 stores in 7 years.
Wow.
And so I'm like, this is a really cool concept. So I drug him down there and made him sit in the parking lot, and he was looking at the cars and noticing these are BMWs and Volvos, not beat up junker cars. And then we went around, we traveled a fair amount, and we'd go to different states and go to resale stores and just sit in the parking lot and count cars and calculate the average invoice amount. And so we really validated the industry, that it was a good industry. So when we came out to Utah, it's like, there's nobody here doing this thing. We should jump on and try to do it.
Very cool. And when you say the types of cars, meaning like these are affluent people coming to sell and buy clothes.
That's exactly right. It wasn't the down and out. It was the what do you call them? The soccer moms
Okay.
that were there
Smart.
frequenting this business.
Yeah. And was that a kid specific business, the one in Ohio?
That was. It was
Okay.
it was children.
Nice.
Yeah, children's resale.
I think you thought about becoming a franchisee of theirs, right?
That's right. Yeah, so they started franchising, and I said, "Well, let's do one of their franchises." So we looked into that, and Brett said, "They're good, but they're not that good." And I think that with our unique set of skills that we could do it better. So we did the crazy thing of we started this business knowing we were going to franchise. So we didn't want to just open one store. We wanted to open a franchise company. And so that maybe made us have a unique and different mindset, because everything that we did was geared around try what can we do to help other people be successful business owners in this industry.
Yeah.
And so Brett would say, okay, so is what you're working on today, is that going to help 10 other franchisees down the road? And
What a powerful way to start.
yeah, so unique.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, and just most small business owners, the first time they open their store or get their first customer, like they're shooting from the hip. It creates this thing called founder magic where only that store can succeed because only the founder knows what's making it succeed, or it's kind of like putting their influence on it, right? Whereas you're trying to say, how can I remove myself from this process on the third or fourth store, right?
exactly. So our goal was to open 2 stores in the first year and then sell a franchise. So we opened our first store the day after Thanksgiving in 1992.
Nice.
And we opened our second store the day before Thanksgiving in 1993, and then we sold our Provo franchise in 1994.
Wow.
So we made our goal.
And where were those first two locations?
The first one was Salt Lake. No, it was out Sandy,
Okay.
and the second one was in West Valley.
Okay. And the Sandy one, that's like by Nickelcade and the
It is.
Dollar
It's
Theater?
still there
It
in that
is there.
same center.
That's my kid to kid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My wife's there like once a week.
Okay, yeah, it's the same
Wow.
center.
That's so cool. So you said you and your husband had some unique set of skills that kind of enabled you to do this. What was he working in? And obviously you had a passion for the industry, but had you done other businesses up to that point that really helped those first stores come out and be successful?
So Brent had gone to law school, so he's an attorney by training.
Oh, okay.
But we really, really hated the legal field, because in law, the only people that win are the attorneys.
Hmm.
No matter if you win the case, you still lose. It's still so expensive, and it's so adversarial. So as we thought about whatever kind of business we would want to be in, we wanted to create a business that could be a win-win-win situation. So with Kid to Kid, it was parents win as they come in and bring the things that their kids are no longer using, and they get paid for it. They win as they shop and find really good deals on prices. The community wins because we're keeping all of that money local. The environment wins because we are helping save the earth every day. Our franchisees win because as they create, the situation where parents can buy and sell in their stores, they create profitable businesses. And then we, as the franchisor, win when our franchisees are also successful. So it's just this win-win-win
Yeah.
situation with business. It's very rare.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the quote, you'll get rich if you help enough other people get rich,
Right.
or you'll be happy if you help enough other people be happy, right?
Yeah.
That's
So as franchisors, our success depended on making our franchisees successful.
yeah,
So it was a
very
huge
smart.
focus.
Your husband's legal background, I'm assuming, really helped with setting up the franchise model after that second year.
Yes, exactly. And he had also, so he went from, when he graduated from law school, he actually went into shopping center development and redevelopment. And so he really knew the shopping center industry and he knew about retailers and he's good at marketing and design and
Well,
those kinds of things. So he was in charge of figuring out the fit up and the fixtures and that piece of it. I was in charge of the operations in the store. What do we buy? How do we merchandise it?
mm.
How do we do the store things?
And was that your first time doing something like that? Store
No.
specific?
No, when I was about 21, I opened Brent was leasing, spaces down at Trolley Square. He was the leasing manager. He
Okay.
says, "Well, we really need somebody to do a framing and poster store in Trolley Square, and I don't have a prospect. Would you like to open one of those stores?" And I'm like, "I don't know anything about it, but sure." And so I went to the library, I read books about framing and that kind of stuff, and opened this framing shop in Trolley Square, and I ran
Wow.
that for about 4 years till we moved to Ohio.
And that was like in the 80s?
That was in the '80s. Yep.
Very cool. Talk to me about this first store. How did you fund it? Was it a smashing hit right out of the gate? And what mistakes did you make?
Okay, that's an interesting story. So we decided that we would self-fund it. So we went from, basically he had a six-figure income in the early '90s, which was a lot of money. And so we had built up some savings and we moved from we were in the process of building the dream home in, Columbus, Ohio,
Okay.
and we moved from the dream home to what our 12-year-old son called the shack in West Jordan, and it wasn't really a shack, but it was, a split level basic starter home, and so we put all of our savings into the store,
Mm.
and so it was self-funded, and we self-funded the whole time. We never really got into debt. So as we developed our franchise company, we only grew as fast as we could fund from by self-funding.
Talk to me about marketing for these first few stores. Obviously, you had a pretty blue ocean, meaning there weren't other secondhand stores, but you had to get the word out somehow, right?
We did. So, that was back in the day when you had newspapers and you had flyers and, paper flyers. And so in the early days, we would print the flyers and we would staple rubber bands on them. And then I'd get my rollerblades on and with my stroller with my little kids, the little ones, and then the two that were like 8 and no, maybe the 9 and 12. We would go out through the neighborhoods and they'd run up to the doors and put the flyers on the handles and run back to the stroller and get another one and come back. And so we kind of did that as a family, as one of the ways to market the stores. It was guerrilla marketing at its best.
I'm sure. Yeah.
The kids were paid a nickel apiece to put flyers out, and one Saturday I had Scott and Chelsea out flyering a neighborhood, and they came to this church parking lot. It was full of cars, and they're like, "Score!" So they run around us and put the flyers on the windshields of all these cars, and about an hour later, I get a call from someone that says, "That was our dad's funeral." And I was so embarrassed and had to apologize profusely, letting them know that, it was my kids and they didn't know. And, we were really sorry, but whatever it took.
Yeah, that's it is guerrilla marketing at its finest. You said it well. What did the flyers say? Do you remember?
Cash for kids stuff.
Oh, okay.
So that was our message, bring your things into sell to us. And that's a pretty easy message because everyone wants money for the things that they're not using anymore. So it's a good message. Got an interesting story. We went into Portugal and started opening franchises in Portugal. And I remember being in the store with the Portuguese franchisee as she's kind of open to buy, or I guess I went out for the grand opening, and people were very anxious to come in and sell their things because there were no thrift stores, no secondhand. There was no garage sales. There was nothing
Wow.
in Portugal at all. And so they had a real uphill battle trying to figure out how to get people to buy into the idea that used is okay.
Hmm.
And so their message was cash for kids stuff, and people would bring their things in to sell, and as we would go through their items, they'd go out, we'd say, "Go out and look around, you might find some things," and they might come up with one shirt or one dress. So at first it was like bring, sell, and buy one item. And then they'd bring their stuff back, 3 months later to sell again, and this time they'd buy 2 items. And then by the 3rd time they came in to sell, they're like, "I love those things that I bought, and I'm gonna buy all my stuff here at the store." And then they started doing 3, 4, 5, 6 items
Wow.
per invoice. So it, really grew as people came in and started understanding that this is okay.
Yeah.
And today in Portugal, it's interesting, Kid to Kid is the 2nd most recognized children's brand in the whole country.
Wow.
So
Like, not even compared to other resale companies, like brands in
brands
general.
in general.
Wow,
Yeah,
so cool.
yeah.
So would you say it followed a similar pattern in the first few stores you started in Utah as well? In that people were kind of coming, trying out the concept, and then they do more and more and more?
Yes, yes, and that's proven out, just even by the volume that our stores do today compared to what they
Sure.
used to do. So, I mean, it used to have, think resale and thrift used to have a lot of stigma associated with it. Today, according to ThredUp, which is an online resale store, they do a lot of market research. And ThredUp has shown that resale is the fastest growing segment in the entire clothing industry.
Wow.
So it's growing faster than fast fashion or TJ Maxx or discount stores like Target and Walmart or your good brand stores that are sold in the malls or
Wow.
Old Navy and Gap. And we see that in the franchise, just our year over year growth always outperforms all of the other clothing industry,
Wow.
resale, or clothing stores in general.
Yeah, you picked the right industry.
Yeah.
That's really cool. But that's kind of recent, right? That wind in your sails and that.
That is kind of recent, but I think even when we opened our first store in Sandy, and within that first year, 6 copycat operators opened up children's resale stores in the
Wow.
Salt Lake Valley, 6.
Wow.
And, so I think the timing was right, in terms of, this is the type of concept. And unfortunately for them, unfortunately for us, all 6 of those were out of business within 18 months.
Wow.
And we just kept plugging along and getting that message, cash for kids stuff out.
And was it the, like, rollerblading and flyers that made the difference? Or what do you think made you guys last versus the others?
Well, I think that it was the strength of our concept. We had a bigger store.
Hmm.
I think that we were also developing a computerized appraisal program that made us different, better, special. Um, so I think in terms of different, the fact that we were paying cash instead of consignment, I think several of those stores were consignment, so you had to wait for your items to sell to get paid.
Ah, okay.
And so that was one thing that was different. And I think another thing that was different is they could earn cash, or if they chose to take their payment in store credit, they got 20% more.
Wow.
So that helped us because it kept the money in the store and helped the people that were selling because they could basically shop for free,
Yeah.
because they were just trading.
Yeah.
And, so I think that was Those were a couple of things that differentiated us.
Year 3, you've got your first franchisee. You're, maybe having some fruit with your granola in the morning or your porridge. Like you're earning a little more money, right?
Right.
Talk to me about year 4. What happened then?
So at that point, once we got our franchise disclosure and all that stuff taken care of, we started going to franchise shows where, as a company, we would, present. We'd go to these like conventions. They were 3 days long, and people that were interested in starting some sort of a business would come and look at all the different concepts. Auntie Anne's Pretzels, or some burger place or whatever, and we were one of the offerings there, and so that's where we met some of our first franchisees. Certainly, our stores in Pennsylvania and in Texas, we met at those international franchise shows that we would go to.
And those were the next locations to open.
Probably, maybe we may have opened a couple more in Utah that were shoppers in our stores.
Okay.
And, wanted to open one in Layton or South Jordan.
Nice.
It's been 30 years, so I don't exactly remember who was next, but,
That's fair.
a few in Utah, and then we did start doing these franchise shows.
Did you guys open up any other stores that you owned?
We didn't initially, but we were very focused on, again, the franchise company, and we couldn't have any failures. So if we had a franchisee that was not doing well and was, maybe going to fail, I stepped in and bought the store from them and took over.
Smart.
So over the course of the time, I've probably owned 20 or 25 different stores that, I took back as distress stores because we were not going to let a store close. And we knew that it was operational, so that I could get in there and implement the franchise systems and the operations and quickly or slowly turn the store around.
Yeah. And how did that work, especially if the store was in another state? Were you flying out there and like replacing management?
I would have to fly out there and replace management and do all those things. So right now, I actually own 3 stores. I have one in Salt Lake, I have one in Dallas, Texas area, and one in Rochester, New York.
Nice.
So, and that's how I picked those other 2 up, is I'm like, these are very good locations, very good markets. The owner just needs help.
Yeah. And what makes the difference between a successful kid-to-kid and one that becomes a stress and you have to buy up?
I think it's implementing the franchise systems. And what we found a lot of times with, owners that weren't so successful is they would not prioritize the most important things first. Remember a franchisee that we had in Georgia, and instead of focusing on buying and the customer experience in the store, he felt like he needed to market. So he would stand out on the busy highway in his Elmo suit and wave at cars, hoping that, people would come into his store if he stood out there in an Elmo suit. That was not the highest and best use for that franchisee, but it was something that he felt comfortable doing and, did.
But those systems, it kind of comes down to like, how fast are you moving the inventory? Is it displayed the right way? Is your team nice to the customers? That type of thing. Right?
Yes, it's really having your racks full of fresh product in season, priced right. And so a lot of that comes down to, if it's not the right thing, you've got to mark it down and move it out.
Got it.
And, and I think that's where a lot of franchisees have a challenge. They're like, yeah, but I bought that and I have this investment in this t-shirt or whatever. And we're like, it doesn't matter. That hanger's worth more than that t-shirt. So mark it down and get it out. And so our system now is twice a year we have fill-a-bag sales, where we just take everything that didn't sell in that season and we put it out, and you can stuff a bag full of as many items as you can fit in that bag for like $25. And customers love it, and it helps us move through thousands of items in a single day.
Got it.
And make room for the next season so that we can have fresh, in-season, current product.
You got to have that prime real estate filled with the prime product.
With the prime product, yeah.
I was talking to your daughter, Chelsea, before this about the market dynamics that makes a kid-to-kid succeed. So how many kids are in a certain area? that's how we choose where the location is. Can you speak to that?
Yes. So if you're in an area where, like, the circle around your store has about 25,000 kids, the parents of those kids are spending about $100 a month per child just on clothing. So over the course of a year, that's $30 million of investment in children's clothing that's taken place just right around your store.
Wow.
And for our stores to be successful, we only need to get like 3% of that into the store. And then if you think about it, that's just this year that they spent on their kids. Well, they probably have stuff from last year that's still nice, and maybe even the year before that's still nice, like their toys and their baby gear, that's sitting in bins in their basement or whatever, and they don't know what to do with it. And if they hear the message that, oh, you can earn cash for your outgrown kids stuff that's quality stuff, that's compelling for them to come into our store. And it's not that we pay a fortune for the stuff, we do not.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not gonna make a ton of money coming in to sell, but they're gonna get some money back, and they get 20% more if they take it in store credit, and they get a lot of good karma because their things are now being used by other kids in the community, in the neighborhood, and we also offer the service that if they don't wanna take back the things that we are not able to buy, because about half of it we doesn't pass our screening.
Sure.
We can donate that for them.
And what goes into that screening?
So we're looking at first condition, and so nothing that's stained or, in need of repair or overly worn. Style, we want current styles, and kind of the demand for those types of items. So maybe if we have a million black T-shirts in size 4, we're not going to buy that.
Got it.
So sometimes it's size, safety. In baby equipment, we're screening for safety.
Fair.
In toys, we're screening for fun value.
And is that something you as a franchisor like provide to your franchisees as a prospectus or something every month and say, hey, these are not safe, or these are, how does that work nowadays?
Couple of answers to that question. We do send out recall notices. So if
Okay.
there's something that's recalled, and products are getting safer and safer, so there are fewer and fewer of those. But back in the day, we had a whole recall binder that we provided to franchisees. Um, we have developed, and this was one of the things that we did early on. So it was like from the very beginning, we worked on developing a computerized appraisal program. And that was one of the things that made us, very different and better. And because nobody in the industry had a computerized appraisal program. In fact, I think we developed the first computerized one in the world.
Wow.
And because we felt like that if we could put it into a computer system that people that didn't even know much about children's products could use the system and come up with the right
Yeah, that's
price
key.
to sell it for and pay out
Mhm.
for the person that's selling it to us.
And is that like you put in the brand name, or you take a picture of it, or what was it?
So most you first identify what it is. It's like a girl's top,
Sure.
and then what kind of a top is it? Is it a blouse or a t-shirt or a sweater? And then you would, say, let's just say it's a sweater. And then you'd say, what size is it? And then you would kind of rank it, how good of a sweater is this? And so we had lists of brands that were lesser quality, Garanimals or Circo or,
Sure.
those kinds of things. So that would be a low grade, or a high grade might be a Hannah Anderson or a Gap or, something like that. So you'd grade the quality of the item, and then it would spit out options of prices to price the item at. And within the system, you could see how many you already had of girl size 4 sweaters, and that could also play into your pricing. So we trained on brands, we trained on style. Luckily, kids fashion is pretty forgiving, because a Disney princess T-shirt that you bought 3 years ago is still gonna be something that a little girl's gonna want today.
Yeah.
So, but yes, and we would do annual, fashion updates, actually seasonal, twice a year fashion updates,
Wow.
so they'd know.
And did you make those fashion updates?
I did.
What is that? How do you create a fashion update for kids?
So what I would do is, well, it was very helpful when the internet came on. Then I could go on to brands like Gymboree and say, okay, here's what's selling at Gymboree. This is the colors of the year. Here's what's selling at Gap. And so we could show what the fashions were and the styles that came out by year.
And before that, were you like going in person to the
I
business?
have to go in person and take pictures and upload pictures, but
That's amazing. That's fascinating. And what's in style in Utah, is that the same as what's in style in Texas or Pennsylvania where you had your other
pretty
stores?
much. But I remember back when I had the Sandy store, Gerbeau jeans came into fashion, and
Sure.
we could sell Gerbeau jeans for a lot of money. It was definitely our highest price clothing item.
Mm.
But another one that was unique, I owned the Sandy store and the South Jordan store at the time. There was some little girl in 6th grade in some elementary school that told all of the kids in her school that Arizona jeans were the cat's meow. And so in my Sandy store, I could sell Arizona jeans for a much higher price than I could sell them across the freeway, barely 3 miles away in South Jordan.
Wow.
And so there are some slight market differences, but the cost of Arizona jeans to that mom who bought it originally is the same. They were sold in pennies here and sold in pennies there, and the cost was the same.
Wow. It's really two things strike me. First, I'm in awe at the foresight of the computer program. Because if you hadn't been planning to franchise, maybe you wouldn't have even thought of that. It's just, it lives in your head. It's the founder magic. It's just like, oh yeah, I kind of know what to price this at. But the second one is how many trends you must have seen come and go in your 30 plus years of being in business. Are there any that stick out besides the Arizona jeans and the other brand you
Well,
mentioned?
we had our do not buy list.
Uh,
Okay, so for a while, some of the things I remember being on the do not buy list, we called them pork chop pockets.
Okay.
Okay, so they were kind of shaped like that, like in the state of Utah. Okay, pork chop pockets. Or for a while, it was flare jeans.
Okay.
And then it's been fun to watch as some of those trends have come back into style. It's like now flare jeans are what we want,
Yeah.
where 12 years ago it was on our do not buy list. In terms of colors, I remember when brown and pink came out.
Wow.
Brown and pink was a big fashion thing, and that was probably 12 years ago. Now if we see brown and pink, stay away from brown and pink. Don't buy that because it's an old style. It's not going to sell.
And I assume some of the better franchisees also have their finger on the pulse in their particular market, right?
Yes,
They
yeah.
they know, okay, we can bump this up by a few dollars here, this one up by a few dollars, and that makes a big
That
difference.
makes a big difference. So I think one of the qualities of a successful franchisee, I call it ongoing learning.
Hmm.
And I remember being at an annual meeting a number of years ago, and our number one franchisee, top franchisee, just sat there and ate it up. And a couple days into the annual meeting, she came to me. She says, "I've learned so much to take away." And I'm like, "You're the guru of this.
Yeah.
Everyone would think you know it all."
Yeah.
But no, she was open to learning more, and that's what made her successful.
100%. The minute you stop trying to get a consultant or trying to learn or just pick people's brain is the minute you die. You remind me a lot of Sam Walton. Do you know who that is? Have you read his book?
I have not, but
Yeah.
I've heard about it.
Made in America, Sam Walton, if you're listening.
Yeah.
It's an incredible book. And it's the story of Walmart. They started in rural Arkansas, and he would go to stores, and he was doing it up until he died. And he would take notes on how they had their franchise or how they had their merchandise laid out, what was on the end cap, why did they put this there? And he was always moving and kind of changing things around, which reminds me of that.
We totally did that. We would anytime we traveled, we would go visit stores,
Mm.
both regular run stores and resale stores, take pictures. Brent had his book of photographs of different things. That's where we got the idea of the little pink kid door. That's, our signature thing. That was in an Imaginarium store
Cool.
that he'd seen somewhere. And he's like, we need, something that's distinctive on the outside of our business that want to
Nice.
draw people in. So he kind of designed our kid door.
And have you ever had a shopping center be like, no, you can't put that in, or?
Only like twice.
Okay, very cool. So going back to the numbers, the average kid to kid does like 817,000.
I think we're at 871 now.
871, sorry. I got the 7 and the 1 mixed up, per year. And the top quartile would do more like maybe 1 to 1.5 million a year, right?
Right.
And that's just from capturing 3+% of those 25,000 kids
In the market.
whatever your radius happens to be. If you're in a big city, maybe it's smaller. If you're in a rural area, it'd be bigger, right?
That's correct.
Talk to me about the average journey of a franchisee today.
So yeah, I was skiing with two of our local franchisees this week, and they just said, I just want to thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to have a business that allows us to come skiing on a Tuesday morning, or to go, take our kids be at our kids' soccer games or that kind of stuff. We could choose which 60 hours a week we want to work. So it does take a lot of hard work. And today, with build out costs and those kinds of things, it's very expensive to open a store. And you could be looking at close to $500,000 to open a new franchise location. And so it is very expensive, and it's risky, but we believe that being part of a franchise and having the support and the systems helps minimize that risk. It does not take it away. We still have people who are not able to be successful in the business, and that does happen.
Yeah.
But we also have a lot of people that are being very successful.
Love that. And the owner pay, you have it like listed on your website. The average owner takes home between like 100 and 180 or 190,000 a year. Is that
I'd
right?
say the average is pretty close to 100.
Got it. And when you joke about, choose which 60 hours you want to work in a week, is it actually 60 hours maybe at the beginning, or do these become passive investments as time goes on?
Definitely at the beginning, it's going to be your 60 hours. And I remember sitting at, gymnastics lessons with my girls with my computer, doing my QuickBooks, and, finding time during the day to get the work done that needed to get done. Certainly these two ladies that, I was skiing with, they're not working 60 hours a week in their store. They've set up systems. They have good management teams. But if you lose a manager, you're back in it,
Yeah.
until you get them trained back up and whatnot. So it can be a really good lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
Yeah. Just like any other small business, you're going to have to step in at
Yeah.
some point. Tell me about when you found out all your employees were stealing from you. Speaking of having to replace a manager.
Okay. Speaking of having to replace a manager, I remember going to a conference and hearing a speaker say, "Trust but verify." And I thought, that's an interesting thing. So they suggested that maybe you go at close and watch your closers to see if there's taking product from the store. And so I went to one of my stores and sat out there in the parking lot, kind of away from visibility of the door. And I watched my closer walk out with a big bag of stuff. And so I got out of my car and I walked over to her, and
Wow, you confronted her right then.
I did. I confronted her right there. And she, looked at me with big eyes, and she said, "Yeah, I did take these things." And she said, "But so our manager, she showed us how to do it." And so she ratted on the manager. So then I was able to go in and use some of our reports and things and look up and see what the extent of it was. And, the manager told the staff, "Shauna will never know."
Wow.
And she was not wrong if I hadn't gone out to verify that. But I looked it up, and 100% of the employees were stealing.
Wow.
And so I had to fire all of them. And so Chelsea, who was probably 15 at that time, my daughter, and I went in, and we had to cover all of the hours and run that store by ourselves until we could hire and train a new staff.
Yeah, Chelsea said she remembered it differently. She said you just dropped her off and said, "You got to run this thing."
Well, that wasn't quite. Well, I was running a franchise company too, and I probably had 6 or 7 other stores.
Sure. And 6 kids, right?
And, I had 6 kids. So So yes, she probably did a lot of it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I had an employee in my original Sandy store that she started out as a customer. She came in and sold stuff, and then she started buying for her kids, and then she took a part-time job, and then we promoted her to be a buyer in the store, and then she moved up into management, and then was managing several of my different stores, and then eventually I talked her into coming to the franchise company to be our computer support manager.
Wow.
So I said, "You're really good at computer support." And she did not want to leave the store. And I told her, I said, "If you hate it in 6 months, I'll put you back in the store." And she ended up working for us for over 30 years.
Wow.
And, one of my great, great friends. And unfortunately, she passed away last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But yes, so you can have stories on both sides of the spectrum.
100%. Did you think Kid to Kid would be as big as it is when you started it?
We did.
That's the impressive part. You guys had such a vision, such a long-term mindset from the beginning.
Yeah, we're like, we can get this thing to 100 stores. It took us longer than we thought, and partly because we were unwilling to take on debt.
Yeah.
And, so it did take us, we grew kind of at like 8 stores a year, 8 stores a year, 8 stores a year for a long time. And, now that we're out of we sold the controlling interest in the franchise company, they're growing faster.
Okay.
They opened 4 stores in February.
Wow.
Not all they were Uptown stores, but
Mhm.
yeah. So
Tell me about that. That sale happened a couple years ago.
a couple years ago.
And was it just kind of like, hey, we're ready to take some money off the table, retire, or how did the deal come about? I'm assuming you've had people knocking on your door for years.
We did have people knocking on the door. These particular people came to my daughter Chelsea and her husband, they own about 20 stores. So they were initially kind of interested in maybe buying their group of stores. And then it was like, well, really, we want to buy the franchise company. And Chelsea said, it's not for sale. And they said, well, let us talk to your parents. And we just felt like they were the right people.
Mm.
Brent and I are ready to retire. Our kids who were in the company with us were not ready to retire. So it was a contentious time,
Mm.
Because we had differences of opinions about
Sure.
when it was time and when it was not time. But ultimately, these guys have come in and they're doing a great job of running the company and taking it to new levels. And
That's
then
great.
our kids that are no longer in the franchise company, they own stores.
Okay.
So
They still get that.
I still get that piece of it, that
Great.
part of it.
And I saw your like board of all the employees. Is that all the people that work for the franchise company?
Yes.
Okay. And you've got, it looks like 2 daughters, a son-in-law, and then I saw you and your husband on there. Have your kids, is that accurate nowadays, or did I just miss someone? And how have your kids been involved in
Our
yours?
son Scott, that was the CEO before we sold the company, he is kind of the silent partner with my daughter and son-in-law. So he's still involved and
Got it.
does some of the stuff, but he doesn't do the day-to-day stuff.
But I assume everyone's worked in a store at some point.
Everyone's worked in a store at some point, and one of our daughters is her passion is theater. She was the operations manager for the whole franchise company.
Wow.
So and she's a silent partner in a couple of my stores. So she has that, and our youngest daughter was doing social media and really build up the Instagram account and that type of stuff. So they've all except one had roles in the company at different times.
Very fun. Chelsea mentioned that you're retired, but you still like to come into the office every day. What are you doing when you come in, and are you looking forward to seeing the day when Kid to Kid has 200 plus stores, or you just kind of enjoy the people and what are you getting out of the business today?
Oh, I love watching the business grow, and it's my baby, and it's been hard to give it up.
Yeah.
I'm involved in we've just rewritten the computer appraisal program. So the initial one I wrote and designed, and I didn't program it, but I designed it, and so I want to make sure that we get that as good as possible. So I'm kind of consulting on that now a little bit. And mostly I'm working on running my 3 stores that are
Nice.
in different areas. But as it's interesting because as I run the stores, I find things. I'm like, okay, franchisees need this. And, and then I can go to the franchise company and say, okay, this is what you're missing. Because the new owners have never run a store.
Yeah.
So, that's a piece that I have that they don't have.
Yeah, super valuable. So one of the things that prompted you to start this business, and one of the things that you're very proud of at Kid to Kid, is your recycling efforts and how much that impacts the local community specifically. Talk to us about that. What are some of the numbers behind that, and how have you made sure that that happens over the years?
So you're right. We recycle at Kid to Kid. We say it's recycling that pays, and which is unusual for recycling.
Very unusual.
And so last year in Utah alone, we paid parents for 1.5 million used children's items just in Utah. And over the course of our existence, we've recycled 225 million items.
Wow. And that's like, you think about the dollar amount attached to that, like retail value, sure, but even just the money that you've paid back in, 225 million times probably at least, I don't know, 50 cents.
Let's say it's about $1.20 an item.
Wow.
At Uptown it's a little closer to 2.
Wow.
So yeah. So it's a substantial amount in the
Yeah.
aggregate.
Yes.
But if you're getting paid out for 20 items, you might get $25 or $30.
Yeah.
At Kid to Kid. So it's not a huge amount of money, but it's $25 or $30 that you didn't have. So
And I heard Chelsea talk about this, that, you know, let's say you go buy at a big box store like a Walmart, 50 to 60 cents of your dollar is moving out of state. It's going somewhere else. When you buy a Kid to Kid, you've got 90%.
90%, yes. So that's the beauty of shopping local, where it's locally owned. And I would say 90% of our money stays in the local community.
Wow.
And where a big box retailer, probably 70% doesn't.
Wow.
So a very small amount, just their labor
Yeah.
basically stays in the local community.
And it's not just the labor and whatever, like, it's actually getting paid back into the families, which it's beautiful. It's this win-win-win. And like you said, it's not that much per item, but it's still something, and that's a powerful aggregate force happening over 30 plus years.
Yes.
Right.
So we like to say we celebrate Earth Day 365 days a year, but we do have, coming up in April for our Utah stores on Earth Day, which is April 22nd each year, we're having a big promotion in our store where everything is 20 to 50% off for that one day.
Amazing.
Celebrating Earth Day and what we do and what our customers do.
Yeah.
For bringing in the things that their kids don't need and
That's great.
recycling with us.
Perfect timing on this podcast. Yeah, that'll be great. I'd love to hear, on your website, it said there's 1,000 plus territories open to franchising for Kid to Kid. It sounds like you guys are in the US, Canada, Spain, and Portugal.
Correct.
What do you mean when you say 1,000 plus territories open?
So in order to sustain a Kid to Kid store, we like to have about 25,000 kids in the radius around the store.
Sure.
So, we just look at, a little bit bigger cities, not huge cities.
Yeah.
And with that demographic.
Nice.
And it's nice to have a demographic where you have we need to have a mall so that some people can go and buy first run expensive clothes that they can then sell back to us. And then it's also nice to kind of have on the perimeter people that are maybe have more modest incomes with, kids that they want to spend their money on ballet lessons instead of expensive clothes.
Got it. Yeah. So those territories you've identified 1,000 plus places that fit that bill.
That fit that
Wow.
model. Yeah.
And talk to me about Utah. How many places in Utah? Like, is Kid to Kid just saturated in Utah? You shouldn't start a franchise here?
I would say it's pretty full in Utah. That the next opportunity might be around in Saratoga Springs. I think it's a little premature.
Okay.
Maybe 2 or 3 years down the line. One point we had a store in the West Jordan area, maybe between the West Valley and South Jordan stores. That's maybe a possibility. We'd have to We'd have to look at, whether the population can
Got it.
handle that.
For anyone listening, I did hear Chelsea say there's not enough in Las Vegas. If you'd like to
That's
go to.
right. Yeah, Las Vegas is wide open.
Very
And we just opened a couple new stores. I think we got one up in Idaho Falls, but I think there's spots in Idaho that are
great.
open available.
And to become a franchisee, you just go to the website and apply?
Go to the website and fill out a form to apply for that.
What's the approval process like?
They start out with basically a brand introduction call,
Mhm.
and you must be financially qualified. So they just don't want people to come in and be undercapitalized and fail because of undercapitalization.
Totally fair.
That's one of the things that we've learned over time.
Yeah.
Sink a store if you don't have enough startup capital.
Mm-hmm. So you alluded to this earlier, but you had 4 kids when you started, kid to kid. You had 6 kids total. How did that affect you being able to run the business, and how did you manage both?
So I think owning your own business is the only way to work and have 6 kids, because you got to have the flexibility to do your schedule the way that you need to work around those kids. My husband and I were an awesome team. So I don't remember. I might do the mornings, and he would pick them up from school and do the evenings. So we juggled that. He did the ball games and the sports, and I did the music and the theater. And so we kind of juggled it that way. And and we had grandparents. So our kids had 3 sets of grandmas, and they spent a lot of time at grandma's house. And they were wonderful
That's so
helps
nice.
to help us raise our kids. And even our kids helped our kids. I remember when I just had delivered baby number 5, and I just knew that I was going to have another child. And I told Brent, I says, I really want another child, but I need to have a nanny. I can't do this without a nanny. And he's like, okay, we'll get a nanny. Okay. So baby 6 is born, and about 6 months into it, we got a nanny, and we went through 7 nannies in 7 weeks. And I did not fire a single nanny. These were difficult kids. They were just, the nanny would come, and they'd run, look at each other, and run separate directions. It was crazy. And, and so I had to give up on that dream, but our kids, Chelsea tended the kids sometimes, and even the 7 and 8-year-old would help with the little ones, and that was critical.
Yeah, after a certain point, they just take care of each other. Hardly need you. So 2 questions that we like to close with. The first one is, what advice do you have to other founders who are trying to start something in Utah specifically?
Well, Utah is a great incubator for businesses. We have so many entrepreneurs here, and I would say use the resources that are available to us. Talk to other entrepreneurs, and learn from their experiences.
Is there anything that you feel like Utah helped kid to kid with? Like, could kid to kid have started somewhere else and become what it is? And what about Utah helped it in those early years?
We started it here because our family was here.
Yeah.
And, this is what we wanted, to raise our family here and be by the grandparents.
Wow.
And that's why we started here.
Love it.
And Utah has a lot of kids. So
yeah,
that was a bonus, a plus.
Yeah. And then the last question is, what are your other Utah businesses that you love? Could you name like 3 off the top of your head that you're like, this makes Utah worth living in for me?
Burt Brothers. I see them a lot. This is not businesses in Utah that I love, but things that I love about Utah are the symphony and the opera and the theater and the culture in Utah. I love that about Utah.
Very cool. So Burt Brothers and the symphony.
Yeah.
What a combination. And any like
Hale Center Theater.
Hale Center, it is an anomaly. I'll tell you that. That place is amazing. Any restaurants? Like, if you had to pick one restaurant, that's your go-to.
Red Iguana.
All right.
We eat at Red Iguana quite often. I like Cafe Rio.
All right. There it is. There's our 2 very Utah brands there. Shauna, thank you so much. This has been amazing. If anybody wants to get cash for kids' stuff, just look up Kid to Kid, your closest location. And if you want to become a franchisee, head to the website, right?
That would be perfect.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of UtahPreneur with Shauna Sloan. Before you go, 3 quick items. Number 1, follow us on social media wherever you like to do that. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. All the links are always in the description. Secondly, if you loved this episode, share it with a friend that shops at Kid to Kid or that you think it would help. And lastly, do not for the life of you forget last week's episode with Heather Griffith Barber, the queen of wraps herself. She recently sold her business and is now on a mission to create 20 more female millionaires in the world, and I believe she's going to do it, buying, selling, and consulting of businesses. So check that one out if you haven't heard it already. Thanks again for listening.